is highlight some current events, and also we have some upcoming webinars that expound on different parts of SEMS, and we'll let you know the dates and times of those as well. Sylvia, how are we doing? Is the audio good?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what's going on with this. I'm just going to do that for now. Okay, so this is the introductory sections. I'm going to kind of jump through here. You guys are welcome to look at it on your own. But it does highlight, some of the more tragic historical accidents that caused industry and the regulatory agencies to think about what should be done, how should we help prevent these. Here's a list of some of the more tragic ones. At the red ones, as you can see, those kind of are what initiated certain regulatory. Oh, sorry. I'm going to try and fix that. Okay. And then if we keep going, it discusses here kind of how the management system mentality was created, how it compares to our OSHA, RMP, and then also, I like this slide, so I'm going to stop on it for a second. It shows all the SEMS elements. The ones in red, for the purpose of auditing, those are what we found tend to get the most citations during audits. So your hazards analysis, MOCs, operating procedures, mechanical integrity. Those you're going to want to really focus on keeping good records, making sure that there is a culture of documentation there so you don't get in any trouble. Also, as we go through, this is a pretty nice matrix that you guys can look at in your own time, but it compares the different regulatory sections for the onshore and offshore, and that way it's a nice little reference for you guys. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the actual SEMS program audit requirements. Here, for SEMS, it's going to be the same as with RMP and PSM, and that is, RMP, and that is 3-year intervals. However, it starts the second year after the initial SEMS program completion, which is a little different. That helps synchronize some of your major updates to whether they fall on the same anniversary date. Also, for the audit plan, you have to submit a plan to now BSEE at least 30 days before your audit. And then also, within 30 days after the audit, you're going to have to send back audit findings with a plan for addressing any deficiencies. On top of that, there are some more requirements that are outlined in section 250.1926 that make it a little more specific in who you can pick as an auditor. You got to make sure that they're independent. In the proposed rule, which I'm about to talk about, they go even a little further than that. And so you got to make sure that there is like a neutral, independent, objective layer auditing your program, and not necessarily someone who put it together in the first place. It's kind of like after you proofread your own report 100 times, you're not going to see what's missing. You need someone else to come in and really do the auditing for you, either internal or external. However, looking at the proposed rule, that actually removes the option of using qualified operator personnel. So now it's going to be only independent third party that can perform the audit. Okay, let's see if this works. All right. Okay, so now I got my clicker back. All right, so we were looking at the proposed rule. What's going to change? No longer will an operator be allowed to perform the audit themselves. They're going to have to hire an independent third party. On top of that, you're going to have to request, send to the BSEE your nomination for who will perform the audit, along with their qualifications, their experience, and then the BSEE will have to approve that audit. So that has to be done at least 30 days prior. Excuse me. And then also, the auditor may not be involved in the development or the maintenance of the SEMS program. So from my reading of the rule, that means auditor or the organization. So if you have a consultant that does the audit, that organization cannot help in the maintenance and or development. that really provides a layer of independent objective analysis to your SEMS program. And then, of course, looking at just the onshore PSM RMP, it's just triennial audits, and you have to retain the 2 most compliance audits. So it's a lot less, prescriptive in that regard. So let's keep going. All right, so now let's look at all of the SEMS elements. And as I go through, talk about some things that you can do for each element as an auditor, what you can ask for, when you're on site, when you're interviewing something. There's some good questions to ask, and then also as an operator, good ways to make sure that you're prepared, and that way you don't have too much, catch up to do when it comes to all of your audit findings. Okay. So first section, safety environmental, and I'm going to move to my notes real quick. Okay. So this is really, as an auditor, you're going to want to request this before you even get on site. This will help you get a nice lay of the land. You can see you have arrangement drawings, structural drawings. You can, get a layout, look at the levels, get an idea of major equipment, safety systems. Operators have, a safety system diagram with evacuation routes, fire extinguishers, eye wash stations, fire eyes, life rafts, etc. That's good for them to have that they can hand you right when you get on site. However, a lot of the information like block flow diagrams, P&IDs, all that stuff, as an auditor, you can look at that before you even get there. That way you don't have to waste time on site flipping through all that preliminary information. Good things to look for in the P&IDs, do they look up to date? If there have been changes on the P&IDs, that could give you a nice thread. You could start examining MOCs. So, okay, I see that was changed. When you get on site, you can ask the operator, hey, where's the MOC for this? Okay, now that I have the MOC, I can follow that thread along. How about the operating procedures? Did you do a JSA? Did you update your hazards analysis with this MOC? How about the PSR, the pre-startup review? You can kind of follow that really good to see how their record keeping is, see where the deficiencies lie. And also, you can look at their safe charts, their existing safe charts. And so if we look at this, example of a PFD, gives you some good information there. You can see major pieces of equipment. What, as an auditor, you should have some idea of the process, and you will know, okay, like this, there should be safety systems there. That's something I can look at. Same with the P&IDs. Good P&IDs, you're going to want to make sure, for instance, this PSP, it's labeled, it's got its sizing, flow rate that it's designed for, and at set point, that's good quality. You're going to want to make sure you look at the P&IDs, they're up to date, they got adequate information. And then an example of material safety data sheets, of course, they got to have those. Nowadays, you got to have MSDSs for even highlighters, I think, sometimes. Okay, so hazards analysis, well, not as part of SEMS, but hazard analysis, this is where you have your safe charts. And the proposed rule, does outline a little bit more in that, you want to identify your consequence, your safeguards, have a risk rank. This is where you have your safe charts. You can also perform, other risk analysis methodologies such as HAZOP, which on this next slide shows as you kind of go from less effort on the left, which are what if checklist combinations, to the right, we have LOPA, fault tree analysis, event tree analysis, and then in this graph, it kind of is a little bit misleading in that it claims that, hey, if you want to be the best, you just got to do LOPA, but really, like, to be the best, you want to start on the left-hand side. You already want to have your HAZOP, your API RP14C review, and your more simple things done so that you can really, allocate your scarce resources of time to doing LOPAs and fault tree analysis on the most risky of the scenarios that you've already kind of come out of your previous hazard analysis techniques. All right, so management of change. As I already talked about in the safety environmental section, looking for new pieces of equipment when you get on site, maybe you scan around. If you see something that has new sensors, new PLC, it could be an alarm. Hey, okay, this looks like it's been replaced. Where's the MOC for that? As an auditor, that can kind of give you like a nice forensic tool to where you can navigate through and start looking at all the things that should have been changed as part of the MOC. And then on top of that, you're going to want to make sure that the entire program of management and change is in place, and that includes the process, facilities. It has personnel. When you change up personnel, that's not something really that OSHA, PSM, RMP have as far as requiring MOC. But offshore, you're going to want to do MOC on that. Maintenance workers, if you're changing the amount or any substantial change there, that requires an MOC. You're going to want to make sure that the facility has those. Also, operating procedures, same thing. You're going to make sure that they have all their operating procedures, that they've been reviewed periodically, that they include all the required components, initial startup, normal operations, temporary operations. A good thing to do, ask operators where the operating procedures are, how you can find them. Ask them like, what do they think? When should they be updated? Who is in charge of that in their mind? Kind of understand, make sure that not only do they have the operating procedures, but that operating procedures are being followed by personnel, that they're being trained on them, that it's not kind of a disconnect between what actually happens in real life and what your book that is given to you, your compliance workbook says. And that's where you can scan through when you're doing the documentation part, you're digging, you're looking for consequences of deviation, operating limits, especially if these aren't already in there as an operator performing a compliance audit to see where your gaps are. If you notice that you don't have consequences of deviation, a good thing you can do is you can talk to your operators, be like, hey, for now, let's look at top 10. What are the top 10 things that could cause like major hazards? And they could probably give those to you pretty quickly. And in that case, you can start with those and you can kind of work on from there. Build off of that to where you have, if you shut this valve and it's going to cause a major overpressure upstream, relief valve to lift, flaring, maybe even some liquid out the flare. Like that's something, that's in your top 10. Make sure you get that in there quick, and then kind of like set a program in place to correct these deviations, the deficiencies as you go. All right, mechanical integrity. This is a big one. This was one of the ones marked in red on that SEMS slide I showed you earlier. This is where you get a lot of hits, and so and it's very important because it's you gotta. This is what keeps your equipment. It's your documentation so that you're keeping your equipment to maintain design intent. So obviously you cannot have a fix at failure maintenance strategy. I'm sure everyone knows this, but can't be repeated enough. You're going to want to have a preventive maintenance program that's based on manufacturer's recommendations. Also, as a mechanical integrity program, I think we have a slide right up here. All right, let me go 2 ahead. And as it is in place, you have a feedback loop, and that way, if something, if you're noticing certain sections that need, more periodic maintenance, or the frequency needs to be increased, or you could decrease the frequency, you have that feedback loop in place. That way, you can kind of make sure that you fine-tune your program based both on manufacturer's recommendations and then your own work experience. And as an auditor, you're going to want to follow the chain and make sure this is happening. Anywhere it isn't, again, you start with identify the critical pieces of equipment, work on those first, and then kind of have a culture of improvement. And in my implementation spectrum, this shows that really you can. It's not really suggested, especially for offshore, that you have anything on the left here, where what is it? Memory of maintenance manager, memory of retiree, post-it notes. That's not really going to cut it, but that's we've seen that in the past, not on offshore, but really you're going to want to kind of come to the computerized management system side. That way, you have an electronic records, you can update those. People onshore can access them. People on the facility offshore can access them. The auditor comes, it's very easy to show them, hey, here are my maintenance records, here's what I've done, this is our law, these are our dates. you know, and the programs, they range from, you know, very complex and counterintuitive to intuitive. So just when you're looking for something, you know, you can ask, you know, people that you respect or other companies, hey, you know, what do you guys use, and figure out a good program for that. All right, job safety analysis. All right, so JSA. So when I was giving this presentation last night to my dog, this is when she finally got bored. So I hope you guys are still focused. But we're on job safety analysis. Okay, so you know, it's a cute little cartoon, but it's serious. This isn't required onshore, but it is required offshore. And it does say, you know, all activities in the SEMS program. However, you know, as an auditor, you come in, you're going to want to make sure at least, hey, do they have JSA for the operating procedure? So you can grab an operating procedure, you know, ask the operator, okay, show me the JSA for this. Make sure, you know, is it easily accessible? Can you ask the operator this? Do they know where it is? Do they have to go to the supervisor, who has to go to his supervisor, who finally shows you where it is? Like, that could be a sign. You know, operators should be involved in this, so, you know, if they know where it is, they can locate it. That's a good starting point. Okay, and then, you know, yeah. So initial test here, it's highlighted in orange. You know, take a handful of operating procedures, ask to see if their corresponding JSA is on file. You know, and make sure it integrates safety and health principles, specific job tasks, and you can kind of hit these bullet points here to make sure. And the proposed rule kind of clarifies the JSA a little bit. And, you know, you want to make sure that, you know, you look at the basic steps. If there's any environmental or equipment hazards, you want to make sure you identify those. And then any hazards that are intolerable, you got to have safety measures or procedures in place to mitigate those. Okay, so again, it outlines. Okay, well, it says all. What, you know, all specific. What is it? All activities. So all operations, at least, particularly special operations, any operations performed by contractors. Just because they're a contractor doesn't mean you have to ignore it. It has to have a JSA prior to commencing work. And also, you know, if a contractor has a JSA, operator has a JSA, you got to use the most stringent one between the two. And then each day, the meeting should include the JSAs for the task of that day. And I think the proposed rule also, there's going to be a sign-off. I might be wrong on that, but each day, when you include the JSAs, they need to be signed. That's proposed. Training, next one, you know, most operators have training. The real thing is you're going to want to make sure that you have the documentation in place to show the auditor, or as an auditor, you're going to want to, you know, start asking questions to say, like, all right, show me this operator's training records. Okay, show me a matrix of all of your operators and what their training has been, what dates it was on, how it was performed, and when they're due next. You know, if you can't get that, then okay, exactly how do you know when the next time it is that you're going to have to train an operator if you don't have any records of maintaining it? Also, good questions to ask. Who's in charge of making sure that everyone gets their training? Like, you need ownership to make sure that gets done. Oh, did that change? Yeah. So questions to ask. Give me a list, spreadsheet, or training matrix of all personnel, including contractors. Again, this is actually just what I was saying. If the training matrix cannot be provided, well, how do you keep track of it? And who is responsible? And then as an auditor, you're going to have to piece together all the records and information that's scattered from different places if they don't have a nice organized training system. And of course, moving forward, that should be something that the facility implements. Contractors, again, there is going to be, in the proposed rule, a little more information, or a little more requirements for contractors. So it's good to look at how you monitor your contractors, as you're examining your SEMS program. Some questions to ask, can you provide a comprehensive list of the contractors used? Who is responsible for tracking their documentation? Where is documentation kept? A lot of times, especially onshore, the facility just assumes, hey, contractor has their own procedure. If they're doing loading or unloading, they got their own procedure on file somewhere. Well, as an auditor, you need to show me that procedure. You should keep a file of that as well, and that way you can verify that it is up to your standards as the operator or the owner. Pre-startup review. Again, this is kind of back when I was talking about the MOC, following that thread along. At the very end, pre-startup safety review. So if you're looking at something that's been changed and they have an MOC for it, you want to make sure, hey, did they conduct a PSSR for this? That's a very good way to see, do they have the records? If no MOC has been completed, then there's likely no completion of a PSSR, but even if that, you could look, is there a procedure to complete the PSSR? You got to get the proper signatures before startup. Have those been obtained? Things to look for as an auditor. Emergency response and control, common deficiencies. This one, especially onshore, can be pretty bad, to where you go in, they show you the documents, and they're all like in this old binder. It's outdated. They don't even have electronic copies. So if they want to update it, they can't anyways. So that's something to look for as an audit. Are the phone numbers up to date? Are the people that are listed, do they still work for the facility? Make sure all that stuff is up to date. Is there training, physical fit testing, physicals and fit testing, and the preventive maintenance program for the emergency equipment? Does that have documentation? Probably not. But these are things you want to focus on moving forward. It's good to flesh these out now before your required audit comes up. That way you can start working on filling the gaps between the current program and the one that you want to have moving forward. Incident investigation. This one also, I've noticed a lot of deficiencies onshore, and a lot of it, when you perform an incident investigation, you're looking for the root cause that, and then you want to, if there is needs for improvement, identify those. So that's where the disconnect comes in. If the equipment wasn't maintained properly, why? Why wasn't it maintained properly? It wasn't, the PSV lifting wasn't the cause, obviously. It was, something that happened. Why were you operating that in bypass for so long? Find the root cause. You need management of change if you're operating something in bypass. So you don't have proper control of your management of change procedures, and that was actually the root cause, not just the PSV lifting. Then ask questions, how do we learn from our mistakes? And what can we do moving forward? If an operator made a mistake, it's probably due to lack of training, not just, there are ways to prevent operator mistakes by providing adequate support, resources, and training. And if you notice a trend, then that's something that can be taken care of before any major incidents happen. Also, another thing to make a point of is you don't want to have blame fest where operators feel, hey, it's my fault, I don't want to give you accurate information or really think about the root cause of this because I don't want to get in trouble. So it's got to be kind of like an objective, hey, no one's going to get in trouble for this. Really make it clear. That way you can really encourage them to think about it without feeling like their job is on the line or their, any promotions, anything like that. Lack of follow-through on recommendations. That's another common deficiency. So maybe you made a recommendation and then nothing's ever happened with it. And we'll actually, and we're going to talk about recommendation tracking later on. That's also a big thing to look at. Another thing, you got to share your findings with the affected employees. So if you come up with this great new idea after the incident investigation, but you don't tell anyone about it, or the people that need to know, how's that going to help anyone? So you're going to want to make sure, you could have safety meetings where you go over your incidents, something like that. Make sure everyone, gets the benefit from the analysis. Also, near misses. This kind of goes back to the what I was talking about with not playing the blame game. You're going to you want to track your near misses, and that way you can identify potential vulnerabilities in your safety program and stop them before a major hazard occurs. And if operators don't feel safe in being able to express near misses or their concerns without reprisal, then you might not get any information from these near misses. They might just be covered up. So you want to have a culture of safety, and also, you're going to want to make sure that you explain to operators, hey, let's figure out exactly what your understanding of a near miss is, and then what our understanding is. So, for instance, that liquid isn't supposed to be in a tank. Okay, that one's that one's pretty straightforward. But relief valves are leaving. They're not supposed to relieve. They're not a pressure regulator. That's a near miss. And if your safety systems kick in, ESD, BOP actuation, that's a near miss. If you notice that this valve is always being corroded out and you don't know why, and you have to increase your replacement on it, that could be something to think about. Like why, think about the why. Why is that happening? Like that could be, a symptom of a larger problem. That goes along with, fouling of equipment or piping, repeated premature failure of controls and devices. That's stuff you want to look at. All right, and then this next section I'll talk about program-wide deficiencies, and that's where we look at recommendation tracking. All right, here we go. So some major things here. No supporting documentation or proof. However, people are knowledgeable. So that's you come in, show me this, show me that. Well, I don't have proof that I train my operators, when they start on the operating procedures and this and that. But we do. I just didn't write it down. Like these are things. These are easy to fix. I mean, once you get a nice systematic way of keeping records, all those things that you do now but you don't get credit for, now you can document them, you can show them, and you're really on your way. Another thing, though, is on the other side is you have a really nice compliance document, but yet there's a disconnect between what the document says and what the operators actually do. And that's where, when the auditor comes in as an auditor, you're asking questions, show me this, show me that. Like, when are you supposed to update this section? Where are your JSAs? As you ask these questions and you realize that, hey, the book says everything it needs to say, but the field personnel don't really have that connect with it, and they're kind of doing something totally different. So that's also something that you want to notice, and again, implementing that safety of culture and management is going to help bring these two sides together. And of course, that kind of goes along with that last point where, very elaborate programs put together, but then it's not synchronized with what's in practice. Oh, and then the very last statement, and I've seen this before, especially onshore, is each section is just the regulations restated with prettier formatting. And, that's not going to cut it. Like, you actually have to have a plan in place. You can't just say that you're doing and then list the bullet points of the regulations. Okay, so this is especially true on offshore, real-time documentation. That's where I was talking about earlier with paper files. It's going to be really hard for you to keep track of that, especially if you've got multiple offshore facilities. Electronic, even if you just scan them in, you store them, in like a server. That way people can access them anywhere. It's very easy to pull them out. Web-based software, it's a similar system. It's just easier to navigate by, clicking on the folders. And again, on land, at sea, everyone can access all your records, all your programs for easy updates. And then again, big one, recommendation follow-through. So this one, as an auditor, you want to look for who has ownership of making sure recommendations get followed through on. What is the mechanism for compiling all of them from all the different components. So hazard analysis generates its own recommendations. MOC will have recommendations. All of the audits are going to have recommendations. JSAs, incident investigations, these all got to get compiled, tracked appropriately. How are people being reminded? Do you have realistic target dates for when these are going to be completed? Do you document that they're being completed? Do you keep this up to date? And then on top of all of that, you want to make sure that you go back and update the document that generated the recommendation. So as an auditor, if I come in and there's a recommendation from an MOC that says do this, and then I go to the recommendation tracking log and it's closed, but you never update your MOC, well, that looks like a glaring gap to someone that's coming in and auditing you. Like, it doesn't look like it was closed at all. So you're going to want, once you close these out, go back and update your original documentation with that. And then, as you're looking at the open recommendations, is there a target completion date to all recommendations? What were the actions taken for closing out the recommendations? Labeling it as closed and then providing a reasoning. Don't just, say closed and then move on. Let's see, in the last one, even if the facility performs all the actions, the documentation that originally stated the recommendation is not updated, it is a deficiency. That's what I was just saying. So make sure once that's closed out, you go back and you close the original document out. All right. Finally, if you're going to decline a recommendation, these are some generally accepted rules or bases. First, the analysis upon which the recommendation is based contains factual errors. Recommendation is not necessary to protect the health and safety of employees and contractors. An alternative measure would provide a sufficient level of protection. The recommendation is infeasible, and to know infeasible does not equal expensive. Sometimes you can generate recommendations which are just not, feasible to implement, and in that case, you can go ahead and document that. All right, and then, finally, we're going to just touch in on measuring program effectiveness. This is the last section of our presentation. So you can see here, we're talking about personal safety on the left, process safety on the right. There's some overlap between the two, but in general, there is a disconnect between, slips, trips, and falls, injuries to workers, and then, the major accidents due to process-related upsets. Examples: airline baggage handling, injuries to airplane crashes. I think everyone knows there's probably just limited correlation between the two. Same with slips, trips, and falls events to major accidents, limited correlation. However, if you have a very good safety culture that reduces slips, trips, and falls, then likely a facility would also have a strong process safety culture as well. Change. Okay. And then again, it shows we have two icebergs, different icebergs, but they both have small tops and big bases here. And the indicators are what's going to show you the top, the danger that lies beneath. So personal safety indicators, lost time injury statistics, you can track that. Process safety indicators, these don't always appear to be as severe as something like lost time injury, but they can be very telling. And that's where it says typically no direct consequences or injuries, summed up as a maintenance work order. So these are things like those near misses we were talking about, PSPs lifting, ESDs actuated, things that, hey, this control valve is being corroded out because we don't realize that there is, we're getting reverse flow of some caustic solution. What? It's changing. So that's where you're going to want to, you want to provide a culture that documents these near misses, and that way you can track and make sure that there's not any underlying susceptibility there that you're not catching. So here again, process safety indicators, having a station, an operator at the vessel to drain it off constantly. That's a deviation with design intent. That's a process safety indicator. Again, liquid in the wrong tank, of course, that's process safety indicator. Regulating via the bypass, relief valves relieving, ESDs, tripping. Those are all process safety indicators. And a PSV relieving, that's a near miss. That's an incident investigation too. Again, emergency shutdowns, equipment trips, those are not normal shutdown practices. Those are indicators that there could be something more wrong. Also, increased corrosion rates. The real answer is why. Why do you have this issue that you're noticing? And that could be, a bigger problem. Fouling of equipment, again, we talked about that. Deviation, the main point to take here, deviations from design intent, that lowers your safety margin. And what you want to do, though, is you want to close the gap between the worst case. Well, no, you want to increase the gap. So by lowering your safety margin, that's bad. You're closing the gap, and you're getting closer to having a very severe safety consequence. All right. So here's some tips for implementation of the SEMS program and for incorporating a safety culture at your facility. Look past the checklist. There's a difference between following a procedure to the point, and actually getting the job done, actually making things safer. So, make sure that your procedures support your process and not the other way around. You don't want to have a process that just supports procedures. And that's kind of what I'm saying here with look past the checklist. Again, this is the implementation side of SEMS. If you have a lot of deficiencies, especially in your record keeping, start out with the critical equipment, the major things that you notice, and start implementing procedures for keeping better records, for tracking these things, and work your way from there. That's just the beginning. Oh, let's skip ahead. Okay. And then again, talk with everyday personnel, non-managers, how they feel about the use, accessibility, and their understanding of SEMS. So you want to make sure that, especially if you're management, maybe you're talking to managers below you and you're getting, feedback from them, but they're the ones that get feedback from the actual operations personnel. So sometimes it's good to kind of, look at the whole range, make sure that everything is synchronized between the levels. Uh-oh, hold on one second. I don't know what's going on there. Okay, go back in. All right, so sorry about that. And again, best way to reduce hazards and risk, changes in the underlying safety culture. It's something that you just got to kind of implement, reinforce day in, day out. If things have been done a certain way for a long time, it's not brainwashing, but you got to really focus on the change. You got to be stubborn, determined, implement this new culture. Like, it's not going to be, just you create your procedure and you move on. You want to make sure that this is enforced. And again, things to note, people do not inherently want to put themselves, coworkers, and the environment at risk. It's not that if you tell someone, hey, do this, it's good for safety, they're going to refuse. It's more, if they're not given adequate resources or they're not given adequate understanding to why this benefits them and helps with safety, then maybe they will not be as inclined to work on that. Also, pay attention to the influence, managers, systems, and practices. Sorry, I read that wrong. Pay attention to the influence that managers, systems, and practices have on at-risk behavior and conditions. And that's where I was saying you have the whole culture of safety. You need buy-in from the top all the way down to the bottom. If you have buy-in from the top, buy-in in the middle, then definitely the bottom is going to be, they're really going to feel that, okay, everyone's taking this seriously, so I'm going to do my part. And and as part of that, you got to dedicate resources to reviewing and updating procedures. Giving people time. If you tell someone, and hopefully my boss isn't watching right now, but if you give someone a task but you don't give them the time to do it, then they might not get that done. So you're kind of putting them in a no-win situation. So providing them the resources, the time, or otherwise to make sure that they implement these safety systems, that's a very good step on the way to implementing a safety culture. Also, SEMS tools for identifying at-risk behaviors, things like process hazard analysis, compliance audit, incident investigation. All of these are good because you get bottom level support and feedback. Incident investigation, you need to interview operators. You might even have some on your team Same with compliance audits. You can talk with the operators. Process hazard analysis. You've got to have some from operations in there, and you're able to get feedback not only from the engineers, that operate or that design it, but you can talk to the operations folk, like, how does this actually get operated? Is there a disconnect? A lot of times you see disconnect between the two, between what people think is happening versus how it's actually being operated. And it's a nice time. Sometimes, it's one of the only times that they can really talk about it and get a solution. Okay. And again, when you're doing this, it's got to be in a non-blaming environment. Encourage honest feedback and allow everyone to move forward. Especially, when we do process hazard analysis, we encourage operators, hey, this is your time. You've got a voice. This is when you can really, state your opinion. If you have recommendations that are needed, they can move their way up and for management to review. And by encouraging that and making sure that they're in a safe zone, that way we can really get the most benefit out of these sessions. Okay. Looking for cultural behaviors that erode safety. So this is on the other side of the fence. Like, what could you be doing, or what do people do that maybe they don't notice, but that could actually, have a detrimental effect on safety? Like I said, incident investigations, if you don't actually identify the root cause, then they're not gonna be as beneficial to you, because you're not going to be learning from your mistakes as well as you could if you really dug deep and figured out what went wrong, what was the cause behind it, how do we fix the cause, not the symptoms. And it's not people that are just unwilling to follow procedures, perform record keeping, and work safely. Normally that's not the case. They don't have the time. There's not enough time allocated for doing those tasks, so something gives eventually. Lack of resources, again, normally time or money or manpower. Tools and mechanisms could be simplified. This keeps changing on me. And then at the bottom, lack of understanding or training. If you don't train them on the program, how to make sure it's updated, then things can fall through the cracks. Informal pressures like performance-oriented culture in which employees are praised for saving time and taking shortcuts. This one is pretty obvious. If you're pushing performance over everything else, then other things are going to lag behind. And just to note, and this is in all caps for its importance, this is one of the most common findings in Chemical Safety Board case studies. All right, so example here. Okay, so you notice mechanical integrity, it's not maintained. So maybe there's inadequate maintenance staff or parts to close the work orders. Were the required approvals or shutdown or turnaround denied? When personnel identified an incident or near miss, are they received with open-mindedness? So all of these things, they can, if you treat it right, you can really make genuine improvements. If you treat it wrong, then you can really limit the efficiency and the valuableness of, your program. In audit recommendations, they need to consider the root cause. So why is the procedure, form, or policy not being implemented? Is it too cumbersome or confusing? Does it fold easily into their operations and day-to-day activities? Lack of resources, so nobody is available to redline and CAD the piping and instrumentation diagrams, or time for personnel to update operating procedures is not supported. That's, these all need to be looked at, and you really need to find a way to provide the resources to really improve your program, and also at the same time, when you think about improvements, make sure they're practical, make sure that they can be implemented, on the operations level. Sometimes if it gets too fancy, it can be hard to actually monitor and work with daily. We don't want to make it too difficult, too much friction for the personnel to actually use. For compliance audit closure, once you have an audit, review the initial results with the individuals that participated. Everyone's in agreement. Brainstorm in a no-blaming environment how to improve your program and address the deficiencies. And really stress the fact that SEMS implementation is a function of the overall safety culture of the company. And so it's not something, it's the company, corporation, management has you have their support, so you can go ahead and implement this, make sure it works for you. And then, if appropriate, make sure those recommendations have target completion dates. That way, you can have a final closure. They don't get strung out too long. I've seen recommendations that have been closed in 7, 8 years. SEMS lifecycle, and again, this is kind of stressed throughout, but the program, it's a whole life cycle. It's not just one and you're done. They're living documents. So once you develop, you implement, and then through compliance audits, you can evaluate their effectiveness, develop procedures for improving the deficiencies, and then, of course, once you implement those, then you can go back through, and that way you can iterate. And so the best way, because some of these systems are kind of complex, the best way to just got to iterate, keep improving, keep working towards a higher goal. Okay, so we got one more section here. Organizing an effective SEMS program. So this, this has to be done by November 15th, 2011. So if you guys, hopefully that's already been done and no one's delinquent on that. Bulk of the elements, they're common to other loss prevention programs we've been talking about earlier, which are PSM, RMP, other statewide accidental release prevention programs. And one benefit with that is you can tap in, especially if you have a company that has offshore and onshore assets, you can tap in to those onshore assets, talk with those people to really get good ideas for implementing it offshore, because they've been doing that for a long time. And that way you can kind of, you don't have to start from scratch. You can use what you've already built up and just apply it. Okay. So again, broad spectrum of activities are encompassed by SEMS, and you really want to integrate your program into what you already do to minimize, and that also helps minimize duplication. And so that way you don't have your normal programs that you keep track of and everyone follows, and then you have to just periodically go and add those to the separate program that you keep just for SEMS. You can kind of integrate everything in one. Then it makes it a little more streamlined, more seamless. And again, start simple. So that's where you can talk with your onshore, if you have onshore assets, some of their ideas, but you can leave what you already do, because you already have a lot of this done, into the new programs, and then just look at, hey, where are we deficient? So, gap analysis of result, and that's a fancy way of saying, all right, what do we have and what do we need? And then as necessary, then you can create ways to update and iterate on that program to make improvements. Okay, so before I finish, these are some current events that you guys can go ahead and look at. Most of these are online, but we have throughout, there's Offshore Operators Committee developing a tool for audit. API, they're developing a list of qualified third-party consultants for audit support, and so that would be necessary if the proposed rule is finalized. And then again, here the BSCE, which took over, or when BOEMERE was split, the BSCE, which is now, it has new leadership, Rear Admiral, I'm going to forget his name, that just took over in November. And then, of course, we have a whole series of webinars on SEMS. And so here are some of our recent webinars, which I think are available online. Is that correct, Solveig? Some of them are. I'm sure that if you wanted, we could, any that you see on here that are not online, if you send Solveig an email or anyone at RMP, we can figure out a way to get them online. Also, some upcoming webinars that might be interesting to you guys. We have tips for training, contractor safety management. You can kind of look through these. Here, a 2-day bow tie risk analysis seminar. I'm looking forward to that one. And then other resources, bse.gov. Here's just a list of websites if you guys need something to consolidate everything. And then, of course, some references. Right. So that's the end of our presentation. I appreciate you guys sticking with me. Be happy to answer any questions. Also, I think Esther's around, and she'd be happy to help as well. And let me see here. Okay, so just so you guys know, if you want to ask questions, you can send a chat message to RMP Corp, who is our producer, Solveig Theater. And then we can also unmute you if you ask through chat, and then you can ask your questions that way. Doesn't look like we're having any questions. So again, I hope you guys have a good rest of the day and a good weekend. And thanks again for tuning in. Yes.